And they say that the surface area of your lungs is equivalent to that of a tennis court. So if you were to actually unravel all of your alveoli, each one of us, you could actually spread that surface area, that alveolar layer. That's how thin it is. You could spread that right over the length of a tennis court.
Welcome to the Athlete's Compass podcast. Each week, renowned sports scientist and founder of Athletica AI, Dr. Paul Laursen, athlete, coach, and sports scientist Marjaana Rakai, and coach and cyclist Paul Warloski discuss training, racing, and improving your health and fitness. Get ready for your journey to peak performance. Hello and welcome to the Athlete's Compass podcast, where we navigate training, fitness, and health for everyday athletes. This is the next installment of our series on VO2 max and how we can improve our limiters to increase the capacity of our body's ability to utilize oxygen. Our first episode was about measuring VO2 max and the accuracy of watches and other devices to calculate our oxygen consumption capacity. But today, we're talking about how our lungs can be a limiter and what we can do to improve the function of our lungs so that we improve our VO2 max. In fact, up to 50% of elite athletes get something that is called exercise-induced arterial hypoxemia, or EIH. So, Paul, in a training science podcast you did recently, you talked about how the lungs are one of the four limiters of a high VO2 max. Could you talk about how the lungs can be a limiter, and in what situations do the lungs become a significant limiter?
Yes. Well, thanks for that, Paul. And they absolutely can be, right? So remember Elias on the Training Science podcast, we were speaking about him on our intro. We're in sort of, pillar number one of the potential limiters of your VO2 max, if we think that's important for us. Remember, just as a review with VO2 max, we're talking about taking the air or the oxygen that's in the atmosphere, taking it into our lungs, transferring that into the bloodstream, getting the heart to pump that blood around the circulation, delivering it mostly to the muscles in the case of exercise, and for the muscles to taking up that oxygen and using it as to convert the fuel that we've consumed, fat and carbs, into energy, where we can transfer that chemical energy into mechanical energy. So this is sort of why it's important. Remember also why this is important. This is one of the most important things when we're talking about longevity. And, according to Peter Attia, outlive. You have a high VO2 max. It's the number one predictor of how long you're going to live, how well you're going to live. So it gives us function, aerobic, clean energy. So now back to the lungs, where we're going to talk about today. And yeah, this can be a limiter, and it's especially seen in elite athletes. When you see an elite athlete running, say for example, doing a team pursuit, 4 minutes all out, or you see a 1,500 meter runner on the track, and you just see they're just absolutely, just going at it, and they're right at VO2 max. They're at VO2 max. Well, you take 50% of those athletes, as Paul said, 50% of them are hypoxemic. In other words, if we were to put a little saturation monitor on their earlobe or on their finger, just like you might see if you happen to visit the hospital, you'll see the medical team put an oximeter on your finger. Well, you'll see that percentage actually go down. Right now, you're sitting listening to this podcast, and if you're not exercising and just listening to it, your saturation is sitting at 98%. In other words, all of the red blood cells are just about fully saturated with oxygen. But something happens, and the lungs are the limiter in that maximal exercise. Okay, so that's EIH, or exercise-induced hypoxemia. And that's one of the reasons why you won't get quite as high a VO2 max in that context, in the elite athlete, but also in disease cases as well. So, anything like, asthma or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, any of these sorts of issues, the lung can be a limiter. So I'll just sort of start there. That's where it can be a limiter. Paul or Marjaana, any comments?
Let's keep asking questions.
My rabbit hole going a little too deep on this one.
Not at
It did.
all.
It did.
Oh, Marjaana thinks
You
it is.
already
Paul
you
likes it.
already answered my question, so I'm gonna swing it. In a case where there's like forest fires or air pollution, does that affect your oxygen saturation?
Yeah, I mean, it could in extreme cases, but more. I think it's more almost an irritant at that point in the game, right? Where you've got to think about it's good actually to think about the lung and sort of how it's set up, right? And remember that it branches out, right? It goes from the bronchioles and down into the aoli, and they say that the surface area of your lungs is equivalent to that of a tennis court. So if you were to actually unravel all of your alveoli, each one of us, you could actually spread that surface area, that alveolar layer. That's how thin it is. You could spread that right over the length of a tennis court. So you think about that, right? And you think of particulates coming in from a forest fire, smoking, whatever, all of those. And then there's little, nervous tissue that's all around that. So that's going to, it causes irritation ultimately. So you don't want to have that. Where I'm at in British Columbia, inevitably we get forest fires at various times in the summertime, and it's very, it's not enjoyable to go out there and exercise. It can get so bad, but you want to exercise indoors as opposed to outdoors. Always very unfortunate. So yeah, that's something you have to be careful of. It's probably not what the reason why it's going to cause potentially EIH is it's not going to, like, you might not ventilate enough because you don't want to almost. So I guess there's certain contexts for sure where that's going to cause for an EIH, an exercise-induced hypoxemia. So, but what I do want to talk about, I'm going to ask the question for you. I want to talk about the four little areas where EIH can actually, I guess, be like why it actually happens in us and why it can lower our VO2 max, and then what we can do about it, and what we can all do about trying to use tools to increase our VO2 max, because I think that's what everyone wants to know. So can I start in there?
Please do.
Oh.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Okay, so first of all, there's I'm geeking out a little bit, but basically for whatever reason, scientists have discovered that there's this mismatch between the heart beating around and the lungs in terms of they're not kind of syncing up or beating well with the blood flow. So that's one of the key reasons why this might occur. Secondly, in terms of why this occurs, well, this certainly occurs often. Remember, I gave the description of the team pursuit athlete or the 1500 meter runner, or name your elite athlete. And we're going to talk about heart next time. Their hearts beat so fast and so much blood that it speeds around through that alveoli, that tennis court, that it basically it's moving so quickly through there that it actually doesn't pick up the blood onto the red blood cell. So pretty incredible there to think that that's a proven mechanism. And then in some of us, for genetic reasons, we have this shunt issue. In other words, like the blood takes a shortcut and it skips the lungs entirely. And this is a very strange thing, but basically just goes straight from venous to arterial blood without actually picking up any blood. So that's just a genetic thing. You can't do anything about that one. And then this one is the last one, is this alveolar hypoventilation. And that is, for some reason, we get lazy with our lungs, and we could actually move them a lot quicker. We could ventilate a lot quicker. And but for whatever reason, we just get a little bit lazy, or we're not training the lung muscles. Remember, it's not the lungs per se that are causing this, that we can do anything about this here. It's the respiratory muscles that are attached to your brain, right? That you can actually do something about. And that's what we'll talk about next, I think. But those are the key ones, the key reasons from a geek out physiology sort of standpoint of why you might be actually getting this, having this issue ultimately with not getting enough oxygen into your bloodstream.
So the saturation is the actual oxygen molecules in your bloodstream. Is that what that means? So when it's 50%, that means there's just less oxygen in the blood, or
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And if you're at 50%, we're pretty, you are feeling that. Like, so we're talking, you're probably up at at Everest Base Camp or higher, and you're starting, and you are really, really not moving quickly around. So, I did an altitude project in my my physiology time, and it was right across from Everest Base Camp at Gokyo-ri, and moving around there, walking around there is very, very challenging. And indeed, our saturation was low. It wasn't as low as 50%, but if I'd kept going higher, and I think when they're taking their final steps at the top of Everest, they're sitting around 50%. And that's why you see how slowly these are, incredible athletes that go to the top there, especially if they're going unsupported without supplemental O2. These guys they're probably sitting around 50. When we're talking about in the context we're actually talking not as bad. We're actually talking more like 90%, which isn't too bad. But that's you're missing a little bit there in your bloodstream. You're probably the cutoff is 92%. If you go, we're sitting right now, we're at 98, towards 98 and 100%. That means all four of the hemoglobin molecules that are in a red blood cell, they are fully saturated. And if we were 50%, then only two of those hemoglobin attachment points for oxygen are saturated. And so that's kind of the setup there. So in your red blood cells, hemoglobin, 4 attachment points, and it's like, can you actually get them fully saturated 100%, or are a lot of them sort of sitting around just only 3 attachment points are set up?
Okay, so let's do some super geeking. So when Ingebrigtsen is running 1500 meter all out super fast, what's his time? Like insane. I can't remember. What's the word?
Well, he's a sub 4 minute miler kind of guy, right? Like he's one of the best. So he's
So
doing like 3:30 for 1500 kind of thing.
Yeah. Insane.
Yeah,
so
phenomenal.
If he's got EIH, I guess it is. Does it matter?
That's a good point. For sure.
1500 meters.
Well, Tim Noakes would tell you it doesn't really matter. It's just really, it's all about it's about the mind and the brain and the central governor. And that's, it'll be what it'll be. So that's a really good point you make. Does it matter? You're right. Or we're talking about a bunch of physiology, but it might just be observations that we're kind of making. But all of these observations actually occur. And it's just, it's such a good point. Like at the end of the day, matters is you moving forward. So, we get all focused on the nuances of trying to get this big VO2 max, but maybe it doesn't matter too much. But going back to, it does actually matter. So, and I know this because when we start to talk now about some of the tools that we can use to change this number, they increase not only your VO2 max, but they also increase your performance. So there's always kind of like, it's all related, right? Like it's related to the mind. The mind's going to feel better. Surely we know that when we throw back to the sauna, right? I know with this open fire sauna, I know when I open the damper on my sauna and I let more oxygen into the fire that's burning in there, it burns hotter. And it's the same thing for us.
So my thinking is that it doesn't matter because he's only doing 3 minute 50 once. But if he were to repeat it with the oxygen deficit, then he would feel it. Like when we're doing VO2 max sessions, we don't want to get, hypoxic because we're repeating the efforts
Totally.
many times. But if you have a 4 minute once all out, that I don't think it matters at that point. Like you train to withstand that deficit.
Yeah, you do.
And that's it.
For sure. And so yeah, you're training your mind. But the other thing that you also train when you do VO2 max efforts. So when we do your 30-30s, MJ, we don't even really know, we don't even notice it, but we actually train our respiratory muscles during that, right? So SoCal's the best example always, right? Because we always hear him, breathing hard into his microphone, but that's his respiratory muscles. He's training those respiratory muscles. So there's a couple different ways you can go about actually changing all of these sorts of things. And again, back to the fourth mechanism of EIH that I mentioned, the alveolar hypoventilation. In other words, you are low, your ventilation ultimately isn't sufficient to saturate all of those hemoglobin elements. So what you want to do, you want to ventilate more. You want to open the damper in your fire ultimately. And how you can do that is, number one, training at VO2 max. So VO2 max training. And if you feel your lungs and you feel the respiratory lungs, your diaphragm and your intercostals, you feel they're sore a little bit, that's a really good sign. But you can also use these tools that are out there too, right? Like power breathe way better, go to altitude. So all these various different, nice, Paul, you got one too?
Yep, I've got
one
too.
Yeah. And it's like these are other ways you can specifically train the respiratory muscles so that remember I mentioned you get lazy for some reason. You turn it off, you don't think about it as much. There's also this thing called a metabo reflex, but where there's a reflex inhibition of the respiratory muscles. So for whatever reason, when we get fatigued, it's almost like that's the first thing to go. I don't know why we're wired that way, but for whatever reason, there are these afferents that go into your respiratory muscles, and you don't ventilate as well. So you can counter that by specifically training with some of these devices as well.
Now all Ironman athletes are buying Power Breathe and
yeah.
But that's a funny thing, that because when I did my master's and bachelor, we were told, oh no, lungs, you can't improve your ventilation, right?
Yeah, well, no, we were, and because there were studies that really sort of showed that, right? So the small studies, small subject numbers, didn't really show too much, but it's where we get better and better now is we get more down to stealing a note out of your presentation I just watched, MJ, but basically getting down to the individual. So certain individuals will have these deficits, right? So it's all about kind of figuring out, well, what's your situation? Do you not have this alveolar hypoventilation, a ventilation perfusion mismatch? Are you ventilating well? Then great, no problem. It's probably not going to do anything for you. But if you feel like your respiratory system could be a limiter, yeah, absolutely. This is a place where and VO2 max matters to you, which probably does to a lot of us these days. This is where you could gain a couple percentages.
Let's take a step back for just a second to make sure that I understand, because EIH, well, let me ask the question. Does lung capacity or lung size have an impact on VO2 max, or are we just talking about O2 saturation?
Well, it's a nice question. And again, the Dargon answer is it depends. One of the key findings is in the literature of EIH, and this is a whole field, right, that I just happened to stumble upon where I did my master's and bachelor's was at University of British Columbia, Vancouver, and they're huge lung researchers in the exercise field. So I was following all of the guys that are sort of studying this. And one of the key things they found in general, if we're going to take a group of women and a group of men, the prevalence of EIH in women is on the magnitude of another 50% higher. And the reason is because of the generally smaller lungs. So their tennis court, remember the surface area of the tennis court? So, they're kind of playing the smaller lines, and the guys are playing more the double lines. So in general, and it's just basically due to the size of the individual. Of course, we can have small men, we can have large women, and then that will throw it out. So again, coming down to the individual, smaller individuals, a lot of women have more of a challenge here, and then largers. Again, the lung tends to change in terms of its size, most correlated with your height. So if you're a tall individual, your lung all of a sudden tends to be tall as well, right? And your surface area kind of increases. And conversely, for the smaller stature individual. So that's the key correlate, Paul. And then you're going to have all the individual differences too. Remember the weird thing, the shunt as well, which is really, really crazy, right? Like you get these, for whatever reason, strange defects where you've got this shunting occurring. In other words, by the shunt, it means it like takes a shortcut. You've got these blood vessels in your physiology that go for some reason just around, they just bypass the lung altogether. So that one's a bit of a weird one, but that kind of creates it too. So much individual variation goes on. So it really just depends on you.
So does the lung size affect your VO2 max? So if you are a small person, your VO2 max is going to be less?
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
It can be. It
Can
certainly
be.
can be. Yeah. Yeah. And again, you'll find outliers in both cases.
Sure.
All the time. Yeah. But then if you're a smaller person, you'll have other advantages too, right? Like you're all of a sudden tend to be now better in the heat. You tend to be producing less metabolic energy, right? And we know that there's great examples of some of the best marathoners in the world. They're very small individuals. So they're having no issues with their VO2 max there, right? Of course, maybe their threshold's higher, but maybe heat is no longer a factor. So yeah, I mean, it's all just kind of fascinating. But at the end of the day, it comes down to you, the individual listening. It's like, okay, take this info and do I want to play around with some of these toys or my training to be able to really focus on the lungs, pillar number one here that we're going to talk about in all these areas, to enhance my VO2 max and hopefully performance. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the how you might go about training your lungs, right? So I have to give credit to Steve Neal, who we had on the podcast, and you can listen to the Steve Neal's podcast, the Training Science podcast we did with him. But yeah, ultimately, at the end of the day, you treat the training of your lungs the exact sort of same way that you would treat your training of of any system in your body. Okay, so like you're in terms of your cycling, your cycling training, your running training, your swimming training, really the same sort of things that we do in Athletica, except now you would apply these specifically with some of the devices. So in the Breathe Way Better scenario, right, you've got this bag that you breathe into, and you can also get the app that goes with it as well. It has kind of a guidance and a metronome on it that will talk you through a certain frequency of breathing, right? So you work to increasing that frequency with generally large, deep breaths of this, so that you are breathing through the full range of motion ultimately in your breathing, and you follow this time course, and it winds up being challenging because it's out of sync with what you actually need, right? So you sort of are challenging the muscular endurance, the strength endurance of the respiratory muscles. Okay, so just like you're doing an SE session, strength endurance session in Athletica, you're sort of doing the same thing specifically with the lung, not the lung, the respiratory musculature. All right, and you're also linking into the mind as well, right? You're looking at the timing of these things too. And I always notice that after I do a series of training on the breathe way better, I can all of a sudden do my VO2 max work so much better because I can actually focus almost, especially towards VO2 max. These are or high power outputs when I'm really having to breathe harder. I almost take like I don't have that lung fatigue anymore, right? So there's no fatigue that's in the lung respiration muscles. So that's one. And then of course, just like we progress our training in Athletica, right? And notice how Athletica just makes every week a little bit harder, a little bit harder, a little bit harder, right? It's following the algorithm. It's just, you want to do the same thing with the Breathe Way Better bag, right? So you want to increase both the duration that you're on the Breathe Way Better for, and potentially also the frequency of those breaths. So you're sort of on the slower frequency to begin with, but you'll be working towards faster and faster and faster respirations, right? Yeah, so that's the key thing. And then the other one that you can add in there as well, it's probably not as effective as the Breathe Way Better. If you had to buy one device, it'd probably be the Breathe Way Better bag, or that kind of thing. But if you also wanted to add one as well, you could use the Power Breathe. And the Power Breathe is almost like doing a maximal strength training session in your with your respiratory muscles, right? So you're breathing all out maximally maximally out. So you're working on both the inspiratory muscles and the expiratory muscles as well. So you're kind of strengthening both of those so that you can add that one in as well. And you kind of how I've done this before is I've sort of done Breathe Way Better bag on one day, and then the next day I'll do the the Power Breathe on the next day kind of thing. So I kind of swap it around just like you would do in an endurance training program. So yeah, and you get better and better and better until you get to the place where you're noticing it in training, especially when you're doing key sets like 30-30s, and you're just like, oh yeah, got it there. And then you can kind of bleed it out a little bit. You've periodized that in and you pull that out. So again, I remember, if you recall, listeners, that I'm working towards my trying to keep my VO2 max above my age. So I'm just about to start a series of Breathe Way Better work, and I'll let you know how it goes.
Ladies and gentlemen, here we go. Prof just spilled the beans how he's taken his VO2 max to another level. So I've noticed on the VO2 max sessions that you're breathing more forcefully and longer than the other athletes.
Yeah, I think it's probably relates to the, almost the Breathe Way Better training that I've done.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we have no relationship to the company, just so you know, right? But
Please send a check.
$1 billion.
Yeah, but I think it's probably just specifically the training, right? Like I'm going, at the end of the day, we want to ventilate those lungs, right? We want
Mm-hmm.
to increase the flow volume loop of our inspiration, and we want to increase the flow volume loop of the expiration. So the total minute ventilation, you can increase that. And that means like how much you're breathing in and out in any given loop or cycle. Like you want to take full advantage of that so that we can ventilate the lungs, right? We want to push. We want we're trying to get whatever is here in our atmosphere here into the lungs, right? So that tennis court can suck it up into our bloodstream. So to do that, you've got to engage those respiratory muscles to their fullest capacity, and that might be what you're observing, MJ.
So can we do VO2 max training for our lungs cycling, running, or swimming? Or do we need to use the bags, the devices to build up that capacity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't think anyone knows the answer exactly, Paul. I think, again, it kind of comes down to it depends. But you certainly, when we're doing any VO2 max training, long intervals or short intervals, and you're breathing hard, you're training those muscles. You have to, right? Because you have to ventilate. So you don't need a tool, but it's like if you're looking for like that little bit of an extra edge, you might get something a little bit more. And again, this is back to the Steve Neal podcast and the experiment that I did with him. He showed that I could increase my VO2 max because we actually measured it, right? It's like, okay, now we're going to do a month of Breathe Way Better training. And sure enough, it went up. So just by ventilating, and all the other factors as well kind of went up too, right? So this is kind of the beauty. If you can actually, you need to test this as the individual on yourself. You will not know the answer. There's no black and white answer to this question. It does come down to you at the end of the day, how you're built, all that physiology I was geeking out about. You're an individual. You're going to have various degrees of all those various different mechanisms at play. But there is some things you can tinker with to work towards enhancing your VO2 max. Enhance your VO2 max, likely going to improve your performance. The more oxygen we can burn at these high exercise intensities, or we can use at these high exercise intensities, the greater performance you're going to have. You're going to beat your competitors, beat your own personal bests. So yeah.
What about submaximal intensities?
That's a good question. In theory, it's kind of, I think, the old adage, just like, well, why would you do strength training, Marjaana, if you were just going to be doing submaximal intensities? How can strength training help you with submaximal intensities?
Efficiency.
What's that?
Efficiency.
Yeah, efficiency. And like if you just think about like the ceiling that you've actually got, and do you want to work at that percentage of your ceiling? Or do you want to work at that percentage of your ceiling, right? Like, and I'm showing my fingers down here, like, so it's just like if you're that strong up here, and you're only working down there submaximally, you've got so much more of a roof to kind of go, and it just means, more efficient, and everything's easy.
Thank you for exploring the path to peak performance with us today on the Athletes Compass podcast. When you subscribe, you'll ensure that you're always tuned in for our next journey into endurance, mindset, and performance. And when you share this episode with a friend, teammate, or coach, you'll be helping them discover new ways to level up their training and life. Take a moment now, subscribe, share, and let's keep navigating this endurance adventure together. For more information or to schedule a consultation with Paul, Marjaana, or me, check the links in the show notes. For Marjaana Rakai and Dr. Paul Laursen, I'm Paul Warloski, and this has been the Athletes Compass podcast. That's easy for me to say. Thanks for listening, and have a great day. We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Athletes Compass podcast, your North Star through the sometimes complicated world of training for your endurance sport. We appreciate your comments and training questions and your 5-star reviews. For a deeper dive into the science of endurance sports, listen to the Training Science podcast and check out the adaptive AI training platform Athletica.ai. Thanks for listening.